All right, we are live, guys. Thank you very much for waiting patiently. Sorry, we were a little bit late, but thanks again for waiting anyway. So we have an interesting conversation for you today as well. I am going to be talking to someone who I've been meaning to have on the show for a while. So let me first introduce to you Mukunda Raghavan from Meru Media. Mukunda, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sham. Thanks for having me. And actually, you shouldn't take any flack for the lateness. It's my fault. So the noise behind me you hear is my little puppy. He's about like 8, 9 months old, and I had to take him for a very long walk this morning.
What kind of dog do you have?
He's a husky, so he is.
God, that's really
yeah.
cool.
I'll send you a picture at some point, but he's a crazy little guy. So he needs to exercise in the morning, and that took a little bit longer than I normally anticipate.
No, that is all good. It's only 10 minutes or anything at that, so it's all good. People have been waiting patiently, so no worries at all there. So, Mukunda, let me just start with you and sort of Meru Media a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what Meru Media is, and a little bit about what prompted you to create Meru Media.
Sure. So first of all, Meru Media has actually been a long time coming. Myself and my colleague, who's my partner on this, Rachit Taplial, who is a data scientist, and I'm a lawyer by training. So I've been a lawyer for about 15 years, and now I'm no longer a lawyer. I practice from time to time, and most of my time is spent I'm kind of running a tech company right now. But Rachit and I, when we met years ago, probably like 12 years ago, it was a difficult space because if you imagine 12 years ago, imagine Facebook right around the time, right after it started coming out, right? Yeah. And you had all these groups online, like there was Hindu Students Council and Hindu this and Hindu that. And one of the things that's where we actually met on one of these online forums where we're sitting around discussing Indian Hindu ideas. And one of the first things that struck us is the lack of knowledge and, to be honest, education with a lot of people, both in the West and in India, about our texts, our history, our general philosophies. And what we decided at that point was we wanted to, over time, build out sort of a media organization in which it's not focused on him or I, but it's focused on the ideas that our forefathers and our civilization have brought to the world. And not only that, like the way it's presented too had to be palatable and digestible by regular people. So both Rachit and I, we know Sanskrit. We've studied under a lot of great teachers. So I'm not going to be one of those people like some unnamed people out there that you probably Google who have pretended to be monks for 3 years and come back and have a social media presence. I'm not that. I'm a very Lokika guy. I am connected to the world. I'm very much involved in it. But this is kind of I found it as part of my calling in life to really take the knowledge and information that I've gathered over the years and still continue to gather from a variety of sources to present it as best as I can. So Meru Media came from that idea. And what we've done is reached out to all these scholars that don't get the time of day really within the Hindu community, and actually the scholar of the community to really discuss their ideas, their contributions, and their knowledge to the Hindus at large. Like for example, recently we went with this guy named Ramdas Lam, who's a professor based out of Hawaii. And the work he's done with the Harijans.
I think we spoke about this. I'm wondering if it's not the same Ramdas who wrote Be Here Now, right?
No. Okay. That Ramdas is I think he's connected to like Timothy Leary and the 1970s, 1960s movement with the LSD dropping and all that. That's a different Ramdas.
Okay.
And I think that Ramdas was Neem Karoli Baba's student. Yes. If I gathered that right. So this Ramdas is a professor of religion at University of Hawaii, and I forget the exact location, but he does a lot of work with Harijans in Chhattisgarh, right? Where he spends his time there with Ramanamis, who are people that chant Rama's name. So because he belongs to a community called Ramanandi sect, which is a group of people that worship Rama, Ramcharitmanas, things like that. But his ideas are fantastic, and how he approaches Hinduism, even though he's a Westerner, he comes from a very interesting background. His dedication, his devotion to Rama is unquestionable. And this is, and people don't know about what he's doing, and like how much value he's bringing to this communities, not just by his presence there, but also the fact that he's done social work to help the young women, the teenagers get education and get out of the cycle of poverty in that sense. So I mean, that's one person we talked to. We talked to a few other people over the past few months, and we have a few more lined up that we really think that bring value of perspective and understanding to be honest, our diverse and heterogeneous kind of civilization, Right. And I think it's important to have these various the thoughts and streams flowing through. So that's where the germ of Meru Media comes in.
Why do you feel like these people don't get their due, like their time in the sun, so to say, despite there being such a big Indian diaspora, such a big Indian population, and at least nominally being interested in their philosophy? Why do you feel like these people just don't get their time in the sun? Do you feel like it's just general apathy among Hindus? That's something that Hindus get blamed off a lot. Do you feel like there's some truth to that?
Well, I don't think it's apathy. What I think it is for many of these guys are in the West. Sorry, my dog's making noise. Hey, stop. Okay. Yeah. So like, it's not apathy. It's this idea that it's only been recent in the past 20, 30 years that we've had, especially in the diaspora, the presence and the growth of the Hindu and South Asian population on the whole, to the point where actually some sort of demographic force, right? And because of that, platforms like yours, like Kushal Mehra's, myself, Brown Pundits, have not been at the forefront until recently. Right, so there's an entire group of scholars across the world, to be honest, and India, and I'll get to India's problem versus the diaspora's problem. Right. The diaspora's problem is there, first of all, hasn't been a large enough group of people to engage with the ideas, and second of all, is that the people doing the work haven't had the larger population be interested in Hinduism per se. Now, I think this is a perfect storm of issues coming up nowadays, which is there is the demographic power, and there's also the general Western world is so fascinated these days with yoga and even parts of Ayurveda and things of that nature that it's growing at a pretty fast level, and I'm almost sure that we'll start seeing more of podcasts and websites like ours coming out of the woodworks hopefully soon, and that's a great thing, right? The more that more people come out and have these conversations, it's great. So I think in that sense, now these guys are getting the exposure they want. And secondly, I think this is thirdly, is sometimes it's important to have people from our cultural background that understand these things, not only like at an academic scholarly level, but also in our lived experience, right? Like when someone comes and talks to you about Ramcharitmanas, if you're a Westerner, what do you know to ask, right? Like if you don't have that background in Ramcharitmanas, or like in the idea of Rama, Hanuman, or any of these, any of the beings in the text, or the philosophies, you wouldn't know, right? So the difficulty is that we're now Hindus and South Asians are on. I mean, I'll say foreign soil insofar as to say the foreign to Hinduism, right? That like America, UK has been foreign to this, so they don't have the cultural background for most people to ask these questions and to kind of tease out the depth and the intricacies of our traditions. So I think that is why that tide is changing now, and I think that's something that Meru could bring, because myself and Rachit are pretty well versed in most of the general texts, and then he's very well versed in much more of esoteric, tantric, and things like that nature. And for me, my expertise, to be honest, tends to be Mahabharata. So,
okay.
Yeah.
With one of the things that I've sort of realized in the short time that I've lived here in the US is that you see first, you see, the people who were kind of first generation immigrants, Hindus or
Yeah.
Indians, South Asians, whatever you want to call them, first generation immigrants to the United States, they were still in a large way in touch with their cultural roots and stuff like that. But with a lot of second generation Indians, Hindus that have grown up in America, that were born and raised in America, for example, in a lot of cases, I see them trying almost too hard to separate themselves from that identity. At least I've seen that in a lot of liberal circles. I've seen them almost trying so hard to separate themselves with that identity. And I feel that I feel almost two reasons for that. One of them is simply how the liberal world or the liberal side sort of perceives Hindus, so they don't want to be clubbed in with maybe that understanding of Hinduism, because there is a strange understanding of Hindus and what Hinduism is in the West, don't you think?
Well, yes, I think, and this is actually, I think, a fundamental problem I think we have, especially in the diaspora, and by that I mean not necessarily the first generation that came here or are still coming here. For example, you still have a good amount of immigrants coming from India to the Western world because the skills they bring and so on, right? I'm not talking about them necessarily, but maybe some of them. But definitely my generation, I was born in India and I came here when I was 2 months old. So I'm in a weird position where I am not really an immigrant that way, but I am. But so we're not given. What we're given is we're taught some things. We're taught prayers, we're taught shlokas. Maybe we go to Bali Vihar or you go to the mandir and to your local community. But you're never taught, because our parents themselves many times didn't know. Luckily, my dad was a pandita, so I learned some stuff from him. Luckily, because of that, I learned the things that I think most Indians or Hindus don't get, which is a solid philosophical background.
Right.
As to why they're doing what they're doing, right? So my dad, sometimes to my detriment, has the particular knack to over-explaining every little thing that we end up doing, right? So you're like, I'll be like, because I'm Tamil, so like, but I know Hindi, but I would be like, Appa, stop it, I know you've told me this like 20 times, but like for him, I think part of it was I want you to constantly know why we're doing what we're doing. Like we belong to a certain I guess sampradaya called Sri Sampradaya, connected to Ramanujacharya and Vishishtadvaita as a philosophy. So from a very young age, I used to have scholars come into my house because my dad would invite them from India and whoever was around, and we'd do what either harikatas or some sort of lecture demonstrations and things of that nature, talking about our traditions. Right. And so I was imbibed at a young age from this. So I was very interested. And obviously, to be honest, I don't know how many of our kids in America had this, but the Amar Chitra Kathas were a godsend, right? Like how,
yeah.
I don't know. And this is, I don't know how many people in America or UK had access to Amritsar Kathas, but I loved them. Like growing up on them, it was the best of both worlds. You got comic books and you have our stories, right? Our history, and not just like Hindu mythology, but you also had stories of Birbal and people within Akbar and people within India as a whole. And it was amazing, right? They had Twinkle and all that stuff. It was fantastic. So I got that experience growing up, and getting that, I think, really set a foundation for me in approaching our tradition in a different way. And I think that's what in America we don't have. So to your point, I think what that causes people to do is just think that Hinduism is a set of practices. And so, for example, like caste, and this is one of the things that the problem you get into. Caste is fundamental to Hindu. Well, no. Caste might be a practice that either was somehow connected to Hindu civilization, but it's not fundamental. So let's not put it that way, right? So, and I think a lot of in America, and this is my experience, is there is this sense of not understanding what it means to have this ancient tradition, not just a belief system, but an entirely different matrix and perspective on the universe that we like is so different from Christianity, Islam, Judeo-Roman, I mean Greco-Roman vision, or anything from the West, or anything from any other part of the world, right? It's a fantastically different, and most of us, and not just me in America, but people in India, we still view India and Hinduism through the lens of the West, because we've grown up entirely in that culture.
I also feel like for a lot of people, Hinduism, I think, you're right about when you say about how parents also teach their kids when they move to the West and how they educate their kids about their culture. I feel like for a lot of kids that grow up, their parents essentially, their understanding of Hinduism is basically just a ritualistic understanding. They just teach them ki beta yahan jana hai, ritual karna hai, this is how you have to do the puja. And yeah, I'm sure that's important, but there is no philosophical understanding provided to the kids. Like, okay, this is why our culture is the way it is. This is why our culture is different. This is what our culture and sort of Hindu philosophy has to offer the world. I don't think that's ever taught to the kids. They're just taught ki mandir jana hai, haath jodna hai, and that's about it. You're done with it.
Yeah, and I think that's partially true. I mean, it's weird because first of all, I didn't even, and this is how in somewhat insular I think I was until I got to college. Right. I don't think I really interacted with many non-South Indians until college. And that's just because I didn't interact with many Indians generally. Right. I grew up in Orange County, and yeah, there were some due to I learned classical music, so that was through that, and then maybe my sisters danced, so I knew the people in that circle. And my parents, my mom and dad were fairly involved in the Kannada Association, the Tamil Association, Telugu and Malayalam Association. So as a child, super young child, I went to these things, but my friend circle was not from there at all. Right? So I didn't have any friends that were actually Indian, except for maybe one that I just had a childhood friend. Everyone else was like Hispanic, Black, and white, and Asian. So when I got to college, that's the first real experience I had. I think, and this is true for a lot of Indians in America too, at least for my generation. And I'm close to 40, so maybe that should give you some sense. That the first experience they had with Gujaratis would only hang out with Gujaratis. They might not know any Punjabis, and the Punjabis probably only knew Punjabis, and but the people from maybe Bihar or UP would have to somehow fit in.
We're unique in the sense that there's no one here that is from.
You might have a Punjabi association, but you don't see an Uttar Pradesh association or Bihari association. You don't see that. But so I think they have a very different cultural experience. So in the country, so they kind of had to integrate amongst different communities. So getting to college was the first time I really saw how different Hindu thought and Hindu traditions and practices are across everywhere, right? So Ras Garba, never been to Ras Garba until I was 19, and I'm like, whoa, this is kind of cool, right? But people there take it to be it's a cultural event, right? It's kind of shifted over from being this actual expression of the time of during Navratri, the dance of Krishna, right? The Ras and the Garba Leela is what Krishna engaged with in Vrindavan in the forest, right? With the gopis. So this it's kind of pulled away from that, and it's kind of become a cultural event on its own, which is fine. I have no concern with that. So, at that time, you'd have people bringing alcohol to these events, drinking outside, coming in, doing Ras, and that's. But the weird part is, there's always essentially in the center of the Garba and the Ras, there's a little, sometimes big, but sometimes little murti of Krishna or Durga or whatever, right? And everyone's dancing around it. So you get this really cool interaction, and then the first time I do Garba, which is Garba Ras, and then Bhangra. I learn about Bhangra and learn how different communities in India practiced their traditions, and it was really fascinating. And then that caused me to move to India for a year in undergrad. So I lived in Delhi for a year and traveled pretty much all across India, but Eastern India, and that was so I didn't.
We're the flyover states. Nobody comes to visit us. Only the Japanese come to visit Bodh Gaya. That's it.
No, my parents came to visit Bodh Gaya, and I know a bunch of people that have. But yeah, I have not been to Bihar, and I have not been to Odisha or Assam or Nagaland. I haven't been to those places, but pretty much everything west of that I've been, and south of that I've been, west, north, and south, right?
Right.
So, and to me, this was the first time I've ever visited India on my own, and also without having to be in Chennai or Bangalore or places in well, I guess Andhra Pradesh, but like not Telangana, but Andhra Pradesh.
Yeah.
So it was completely eye-opening to travel across the breadth of India, going from Dwarka to Somnath to Kanchipuram to Gangotri, Yamunotri. It was just, it blows the mind how different practices are. Like, and I thought it was, sometimes you go to these places and you come out thinking, hey, is this the same religion? I mean,
right.
Are we all practicing the same thing? I mean,
right.
but there is, and this is the difficulty is, and there's a great scholar by the name of Balagangadhar who talks about the concept of religion, and part of the problem is we're actually talking about all these traditions as if they're somehow one, and they're not. There's probably some sort of stream of thought that connects everything. There's this, I would almost have to say, connectedness, but not. It's almost indescribable. Like how is Buddhism connected to Hinduism? They're very similar, right? Like, especially when you think about like their philosophies and their views of the world, and they're much more similar, but much more different than like Christianity is to Judaism. Like Buddhism isn't a rejection or a change of Hindu thought or Hindu thought that came before it. What it was an attempt to say, hey, there's another monistic path, ascetic path. But it had nothing to say about actually the Lokika life or actually anything connected to anything more than moksha. They want to talk about moksha as an aesthetic path,
right,
as opposed to living your daily. Most Buddhists at that time even were not in a monastic order. They would go in every day, wake up to keep their these brahmanas will keep the Panchamahayagnas at home, and then you have Kshatriyas will still follow the Kshatriya code, Vaishyas will still follow the Vaishya code. They still worship all the murtis and devatas of in the Hindu tradition. Will still do yajnas. Will do everything they did as Hindu, but they'll just go listen to Buddha speak, and then some of them will go in if they bought into it good enough. They'll enter his monastic order. Otherwise, they did both, and they had no concern about shifting in between. Am I changing religions? Oh my God, how do I convert? None of that stuff, right?
I mean, it's similar to if you look at something like the Bhakti movement, or if you look at something like what Guru Nanak taught to his followers. It's basically what Guru Nanak taught to his followers is pretty much the essence of Advaita Vedanta, but.
He wasn't an Advaitist, but he was actually, it's different. He was. We'll get into that later, but he was not an Advaitic Vedantin. He wasn't a Shankara Advaitin. So that's
not a Shankara Advaitin, but it's very similar to the philosophy that he's teaching, the philosophy of Eko Omkar. Yeah, it's a very similar philosophy to what the Advaita the Vedanta teaches, and I just feel like there is that celebration of difference, which I think is such a key differentiator of Indian philosophy to any other kind of philosophy, is that acceptance, not just acceptance, but almost to an extent celebration of something different. If there's something different that people can, people relate to, if that's taught, that's something that's celebrated in India. Whereas at least over the past couple of thousand years, that's something that's not necessarily been entertained in the rest of the world.
Well, diversity is, I think this is always a difficulty of talking about anything connected to Hinduism or India, right? Because our lifeblood is diversity, or even our Vedic texts, our Upanishad texts, they don't have a sense of total agreement on things. They have an idea about diversity of thought and opinion. This is actually and I think part of this is due to the fact I think the Vedas were composed in different time periods in different areas across Afghanistan, all the way till like Bihar and a little bit past that, and towards the Vindhya Mountains, south and north. They got all the way up to Himalayas. It's composed over a vast area with people from different rishis and different women seers and sages from so many different backgrounds that had so many different cultural experiences, and they brought it all together into this text called originally the Rig Veda, and then you had the Yajur, Sama, and Atharva at the last come in, and because of that, everything in our traditions, is so diverse. So, like you'll have you'll have Vaishnavites, but there's a difference between Pancharatrins versus Bhagavatas versus other schools of thought, and that's not because they don't see the inherent divinity in the other school of thought. What they see is just like, oh yeah, we all agree that there's some Brahman here, that the universe is like somewhat like this, but what does that mean, right? And that's where we get caught up in, which is important too, right? These ideas change the way you view your role and the role of the world in and of itself, right? But there's never a sense of, if you're wrong, we're gonna ostracize you. No, you're wrong. If we beat you in debate, you join us. Otherwise, you just sit in your corner over there. We'll sit in our corner. We'll do our thing. You do your thing, and leave us each alone, right? And we'll interact when we need to interact. It is this, I would say, the crashing and then ebbing of ideas constantly, and this is how our entire, and sometimes when that crash happens, some of the water in one crash goes to the other, and the water in the other goes to the other. So there's always constant diffusion of ideas throughout the Indian Hindu history, which is very fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And I just want to acknowledge a couple of super chats. Rupesh Kumar, thanks very much, man, for your super chat. Right is always right. Thank you very much as well. And I feel like that's what makes it difficult for, Westerners for sure, but even for Indians to sort of present a coherent definition of Hinduism. Because you ask a Christian what Christianity is like, there's the book right there. That's what Christianity is. Yeah. You ask the Muslim, he'll say, there's the book right there. That's what Islam is. Right. Yeah. For Hindus, like you were talking about just now, just the sheer diversity that exists within India and within Hindu culture in general. I mean, the Chhat Puja of Bihar is very different from Ganpati Puja of Maharashtra, for example. So absolutely, there are such of these massive, in my opinion, beautiful differences. But it poses an interesting problem in maybe a Western understanding of Hinduism and maybe an Indian understanding of Hinduism as well. Do you find that Indians find it? I don't know if Indians in India and Indians overseas find it difficult to adequately explain what Hinduism is.
Right, and I mentioned this professor before, but I'll bring it up again because I think I read a couple of his works. He's a seminal author. Bala Gangadhara, he's a professor in Belgium at the University of Utrecht.
I thought you were talking about Tilak.
No, sorry, not Bala Gangadhara Tilak. SN Bala Gangadhara. He's at the University of Utrecht in Belgium, right? So he's a professor who's come up with this concept of that whole idea of religion is very Christian. No matter, even if you secularize it, it's a Christian idea. And so to have this conversation, even about religion when it comes to India, or for example, when we talk about the Greeks as religion, it makes no sense. Because the moment you have that conversation, you are putting the entire concept, the entire experience, the idea, the vastness of India into a box that is controlled, confined, and regulated by Christian norms, Judeo-Christian norms. So the idea of religion is in and of itself a very Western Christian idea. Yeah. So if you want to talk about religion, then we're forced to have difficulty in describing Hinduism because Hinduism doesn't fit into that box in any way, shape, or form. Right. We're partially a belief system. We're partially a practice system. We're partially a lived system, experiential system. We're all these things, right? Like part of us, some of us might be like our good friend Kushal Mehra. He has no belief system as to God, but he'll still do the rituals.
Yeah.
So is it once in a while? Does that make him a Hindu? Of course. But at the same point, some guy believes hardcore into, like, say, Shiva or Shakti or Vishnu, but maybe they don't practice. Does that make him a bad Hindu? No. I mean, or if you do practice, I mean, there's, or you do things like you do yoga, but you don't do any other practice but yoga, but you have an experience and you connected Hinduism. Does that make you? I mean, that's the problem is you can't talk about Hindu as a religion because it's not. It is something vastly more and vastly different. It's alien to the concept of religion.
Right.
So this is where the difficulty is. Oh, you guys are XYZ. Yeah. Are we idol worshippers? Sure we are. But we're also not. You know, like, because for us, for some of us, the murti itself, the idol itself, and I know people will get mad at me for calling it idol, but I'll call it idol for the simple fact is it's composed of matter, right? It's a material thing. But in some philosophies, that material thing is Bhagavan or Bhagavati herself.
Right.
Whether or not you do the pran pratishtha to bring them in or not, you can worship a tree. You can worship a rock. You can carve that rock into an idol or murti. Whatever you want to do. It is sacred and profane. All these things that the West wants to codify us in, right? And Max Weber was one of the first to try to address, to make Hinduism into a religion too. Like, he sacred, profane, this and that. He put these dichotomies, but we don't live in dichotomies, man. I mean, generally speaking, the Indian civilizational ethos or idea has been not a dichotomy, but trichotomy. I mean, not trichotomy, but a triple system, right? Everything, this probably comes from Sanskrit, masculine, feminine, neuter. We cover extremes and we cover everything in between.
Right.
So that is where we have a fundamental shift we have to make in our thinking when we talk about this thing called Hinduism. And even a term like Sanatana Dharma, I don't like it either. I don't like these terms, and I have to use them because otherwise I'm like talking to an audience that has no sense of what I'm talking about.
Right.
So these are terms I just use as placeholders for what I mean to be this vastness of thought, experience, and ideas that we can't just narrow down into a single book or a single guru or a single acharya or a single just even region.
Right.
So it's more than that.
It is more than that, and that, again, I feel like that poses the challenge, right? Like, if, for example, if you're trying to explain, if you're let me just take an example of the two of us because we live here in the US. So, for example, if you're like if you're a Hindu living in the United States and you're trying to tell your friend who doesn't know what Hindus are, what Hinduism is, and his only experience of Hinduism is freaking Indiana Jones and, you know, that movie, that Kalima movie where the guy eats monkey brains and all that
monkey
bullshit.
Brains. Kalima mujhe shakti do.
Yeah, exactly. That's what people's, you know, it sounds silly to people that are not based maybe in the West, that, oh, that's not what they think. But you will be surprised as to how many people genuinely think that's what Hindus are. So if you're talking to someone like that, and, you know, they have an open mind, but if you're talking to someone like that and you're trying to explain to them what Hindus are, what Hinduism is, what do you feel like is a easy, coherent way in explaining something like this to someone like that, whose only maybe experience of spirituality, religion is very, very tied into the Christian experience? Right.
And this is something that I've grappled with. I think is a difficult thing to respond, right? I can give typical response of Hinduism is, it is a pluralistic, monotheistic religion, that we all worship multiple gods, but it's all the same God. I think that's a cop out, but you have to say it in some sense because they don't have these concepts the way we do, right? Yeah. Like, you know, and the difficulty is nowadays I just to be like, I'm like, if you really want to know, let's sit down for 15 minutes.
Okay.
You know, like, I'm not going to give you a 30-second talking point about something that's older than all three religions, put Islam and Christianity together. We're older than that too, right? We're older than that by a couple thousand years.
Yeah.
So You can tell me your system of particular Protestantism, Catholicism, Sunnism, Shiaism in a very small spiel. I can't do that because you're asking me to codify a region that is so vast of people, like, going from like our origins are from around Afghanistan, a little farther than that, to as far as east as you can go, to as far as south in Tamil Nadu. Different people. These are the most diverse place on the planet is in this region.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of cultures, languages, communities. You want me to tell you all thousands of languages, thousands of ideas? You want me to give you a 30-second spiel on that? Sorry, man, I can't do it because we don't have that.
Yeah.
We are, and it's funny I'll give an example this way. Like in South India, right? In Tamil Nadu, there's that whole DMK, the Draviga Munnetra, whatever. I always have trouble with that, the K, whatever. But it's a bunch of kooks, is what I call them, right? Like, crazy people. Not all of them. I'm just being facetious partially, but they have a sense that these Aryan gods came down, right, into Tamil culture, or they call them Kalacharam, which means like tradition, culture, and imposed these Aryan deities. But they don't. And the crazy thing is, the oldest Tamil texts, the Tolkappiyam, the Agam literature, the Puram literature, all talk about Mayan, who is Vishnu, Krishna, and then there's Shivan, there is Durga, Murugan, these gods that we think that these Dravidian DMK people think are North Indian are just as South Indian. Yeah. As long as Tamil culture has been around, from at least any sort of text we have or tradition, oral tradition, those gods have been there. Yeah. So to tell me, but you as a Bihari going to see Tamil practice of Hinduism, whether you might align to the Kovil or Mandil or the Mandir experience of Hinduism, right? But if you go into a village and you go see how they practice their Hinduism, or a different community, you will come out saying, "Are we doing the same thing?" Yeah. But the thing is, they're doing it, but they're expressing. It might be Vishnu seen in Tirupati as Balaji, right, versus you go to somewhere in another location and Vishnu is worshipped as a Shaligrama, which is also north, which is so different, right, but the worship is different. Or is Vishnu worshipped in a village, maybe like in an anthill or something else, or Shakti or Shiva in a different way, right? So the practice, even their belief system, will be very different. But somehow there's a connection that if you sit around long enough, you start feeling that. And that's where I'm saying the difficulty is talking about the diversity of this and the beauty of that, and kind of bringing it down to a 30-second piece, I think does more disservice.
But that makes it a little tricky too, right? Like, I understand the point that you're making about, being able to explain the entire thing in 15 minutes to somebody who's genuinely interested. But there's so many instances where people just need some kind of an answer. So so I feel like at some point Hindus will need to provide like a 30-minute spiel. Maybe it's not 100% entirely accurate, but they'll have to provide some sort of an understanding as to what Hinduism is, what Hindu culture is, what Hindus are, right?
Yeah, so I mean, part of me was going to get to this point is, so I don't focus on these belief ideas or practices. Sure. I think the central tenet or central idea that one can talk about is Dharma. And that to me is what Hinduism or Buddhism or Jainism, Sikhism, Ajivikas is fundamentally about, Dharma. And because the rest is a practice or belief or experience of a deity, or a non-deity in Buddhist case, or Samkhya, whatever. But Dharma fundamentally is what connects all these things, right? Even the word Dharma, it says Dharyati iti Dharma, right? That which upholds is Dharma. And the meaning of that is that what upholds, sustains, connects, binds all things, right? That is the root of our everything we do, right? And this is why you have things like the Purushartha and even Varna Ashrama, and you have various kinds of dharma. You have Swadharma, Kula Dharma, Raja Dharma. I mean, all these dharmas. So by the way, here when I use dharma, I don't mean religion. I think that to me is the most like bastardization of the word dharma that anyone can say, because dharma, whatever you want to say, is not about that. It's not about what you believe or it's about how you live, how you engage with the world. What is it that you do that brings value to not only yourself, but the world at large? And maybe sometimes that's going to be negative. Maybe sometimes that's going to be positive. But dharma fundamentally is about how to be in this world and be well in this world, right? So, and that to me is the crux of everything that is our tradition. Like Mahabharata is fundamentally, that's what, like everything's about. Is really about dharma.
Right. So if if let's say, to play devil's advocate, somebody turns around and says, okay, well, you explain dharma this way, but what is there to separate or differentiate dharma from, say, like a Christian worldview? Because that is what the Bible is also teaching you about, how to exist in this world, how to interact with the world, so on and so forth. So what do you think? Sure.
So dharma, by the way, doesn't tell you necessarily how to exist.
Sure.
It gives you some prescriptions, but even like the text of Mahabharata is about, to be in this world, the fundamental difficulty is to be good.
Sure.
This is the hardest thing to do, right? People think it's easy, but it's not. Even a good person, like intrinsically good, has difficulty being good, because there's always consequences to it, right? Everything in life has consequences, but if you're bad, your consequences might be down the line, the negative consequences. The immediate feeling makes you happy. But when someone says Christians doing their dharma, Muslims doing their dharma, in some sense one could say, yeah, you're doing their dharma. Now the question is what dharma are they doing? Are they doing Swadharma, Kula Dharma, Raja Dharma, Loka Dharma? I mean, and this is why we have to have that conversation. Like, people just say dharma, but our texts are specific, and they're also very engaged with the idea that what this dharma means. Like, for example, the nature of marriage is connected to Kula Dharma, your practices, right? So and this is an interesting story in Mahabharata, Vyasa Mahabharata, when Draupadi was about to be married to the 5 Pandavas, right? Drupada is up in arms. He's like, no way, I'm not going to let my daughter marry five men. That's untenable, right? So Vyasa comes and tells him a few things. He tells him a story first about, the original story of Draupadi being a woman who had done penance and said to Shiva when he appeared 5 times, I want a husband, a great husband. I want a great husband, 5 times. And so he said, in your next life you'll have 5 husbands, right? There's another story in which this Indra is going to travel. He sees these golden lotuses down a river, and he starts following the river up. And when he goes up to the river, because he sees hundreds of golden ones, he sees Shri Lakshmi crying, and he says, "Why?" And she says, "Well, my husbands are inside and they're trapped, and they can't get out." And he goes in, and he sees it's Indras, 5 other Indras, like him. So for her to get out, the thing is, she had to have the 5 Indras born again, and Shri is considered Draupadi is considered avatar of Shri. Right. The 5 Indras ends up being the 5 Pandavas. The final story is saying this. Vyasa tells Drupada, before the Kuru kingdom came here, before the dharma of the Kurus took over this land, women were allowed to marry whoever they wanted, and they could have multiple husbands. Now, when the Kurus came, we enforced a single rule of a single woman to a single man. But dharma is not just about Kuru dharma. It's about a larger thing. So for the greater good to make the truth of what Kunti said happen, and for Vyasa's also goal is to have this happen, right, is she can marry the 5 men. So it's not just about what dharma it is in a particular situation, because Christianity, Islam, in many places, and even parts of Hindu thought are created in a time, location, and place, right? But that time, location, and place changes, right? And Bhishma says later on, the Moksha Parva and then Shanti Parva, that dharma is based upon kala, titi, and desha, right? Location, time, situation. So dharma changes. So the entire text of Mahabharata has stories about how dharma is different. There's also a thing called apadharma. When things all are chaotic, what can a person do?
Right.
Rules change completely. So like what applies when there's a good government changes completely when there is a terrible government or there's no government.
Right.
So the same rules of ahimsa in that don't apply anymore. Because the ultimate goal, one of the biggest things of dharma is preservation of life.
Right.
So can I give one more story?
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Good old.
So I'll tell you like this interesting one. This is actually in Karna Parva when Krishna explains to Arjuna why Drona was killed the way he had to be killed. Okay. He says to him like this, he gives us a story. One day there's a sage meditating in the forest, and he had taken a vow of satyavada, always telling the truth, right? And what happened is, as he's meditating, a family runs by, a father, mother, and like 2 or 3 kids. And they said, Swami, we're being chased by bandits. They're trying to kill us, steal our stuff. Please don't tell them where we went. So they run in one direction. The bandits come, and the bandits say to him, the same thing. Oh, we're chasing after these people. Where are they? And he points in their direction, right? And they go and kill him. And that rishi goes to Naraka or hell or whatever you want to call it. Why? I mean, and Krishna doesn't answer the story there. He gives that story, but the import is coming through, right? Your personal swadharma, to tell the truth, can never triumph the dharma of protecting life.
Right.
So dharma is about conflict of values, conflict of ideas constantly. And we have to choose and hierarchically make our values, right? And dharma is about what is the most open system in which life is valued. Ahimsa is practiced. Not ahimsa, by the way, just does not mean the Buddhist Jain concept.
Oh no, of course. I
no
think
violence.
The Hindu idea of ahimsa is very different from the Jain or the Buddhist idea of ahimsa.
Or Gandhi idea.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, very different.
Violence can be done, and it's all. The better term is actually anir shamshaya, which is non-cruelty, right? You should not be cruel. Violence can happen, but non-cruelty is the most important thing. That when that violence occurs, how do you do it in a way not to be cruel? And there's a list of values that connect to dharma, right. And Krishna talks about it in chapter 17, I think, of the Gita, which he talks about the 2 paths, the deva sampati and asura sampati, right? So that's
I think another very important, or at least important for me, point of difference between sort of Hindu culture, Hindu ideals, and Abrahamic ideas and ideology is the focus on experience. There is also a certain focus on the experiential aspect of it, because in Abrahamic religions, you are dealing with a proxy. You are never dealing with the real thing by yourself. You're always dealing with a proxy. Well, most of the time, you're dealing with a proxy. You're dealing through a prophet. You cannot have that contact that the quote unquote prophet had. You can't have that contact yourself. So that is why the prophet is so important, because he's the only link.
Well, I think that's specific to Islam. Christianity not, because Christianity requires a God. It came as Jesus, right? So the God is Jesus. And so now it depends. If you're Protestant, then you don't need an intermediary. This is one of Martin Luther's 99 issues with the church, where he nailed onto the church wall, is one there should be no intermediary between oneself and God, right? Because the Catholic Church required that one's relationship with God had to be brokered through the church, as opposed to Protestantism, which doesn't require. So, which is why half the time they ask you, when they come approach you, especially in India, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus?
Yeah.
And your response is, I'm like, I have a personal relationship with like 300 other gods.
Yeah.
I'm cool with my gods. I don't need another god in my wing here.
Yeah.
I mean, he's cool and all, but he's not the guy I want to go to.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I meant Islam specifically. I mean, with the prophet stuff, there's that problem of dealing with a proxy. There isn't as much with the Sufi system. You could say there's a little bit more focus on the experiential aspect of it and building a direct relationship and all of that stuff. But I feel like that is probably articulated best in Hindu philosophy, and that's a major point of difference, in my opinion. That's a major one, because where you go from old rishis to somebody even relatively new like Swami Vivekananda, who focuses so heavily on the experiential aspect, on maybe making that connection yourself. That, I think, is an interesting way or an interesting point to communicate to an audience that is maybe not as well versed with Hindu philosophy, is the experiential aspect of it, is the spirituality aspect of it. Because when people hear the word spirituality, they just think of some, new age mumbo jumbo, but it's not just that, right? There's more to spirituality than just that, just the, oh my God, my spirit and all that. There's more to it. The whole practice of yoga, the whole science of yoga at this point is built around the concept of manipulating your breath or your prana, or finding some kind of control over your prana, which is the basis or the backbone of Indian spirituality, is how we deal and how we connect with our prana, right?
Yeah. I mean, so for example, I just want to address, in Islam, I don't think they require intermediary either, because your relationship with God. But the difference is also, I think, in Islam, it's not necessarily a relationship; it's the 5 pillars you have to follow, and that just makes you Muslim. I don't know, and because I've never practiced Islam.
I feel like there's a subservient relationship,
which can happen. Which can happen in Hinduism too. It depends on what sort of. So when you get to Bhakti, there's like 9 different types of Bhakti. Especially if you read Narada Bhakti Sutras and things of that nature, he lays out like Madhurya Bhakti, Dasa Bhakti. There's the Saha Bhakti. There's a bunch of different ones. But Hindu, and again, this is the difficulty: is yes, in many ways, Hinduism is very experiential, but that experience can be brokered through an intermediary, gurus. Gurus, fundamentally, the nature of guru is they're supposed to guide you in this darkness, right? And a reason for that is much better to have a physical being in front of you that can guide you day to day, time to time, whatever it is, than maybe having the esoteric or, abstract or very amorphous relationship. And actually, it's not. I mean, it can be that, but it can also be very personal with a deity that's not physical, right? It's not a corporeal entity. So, and this is where, like, trying to differentiate Hinduism from the other religions becomes difficult. Is because, and maybe this is actually the best thing to say. Like the Mahabharata says, all that which is found in other things we'll find here. What is found here will not find anywhere else. Not found here. I say that's about Hinduism. All that you find in Islam and Christianity and Judaism, you'll find in Hinduism. Like if you want to be very Talmudic, you can find people in Dharmasastra tradition that are just as Talmudic and very focused on the interpretation and the hermeneutics of studying the text. If you want to find someone super bhakti like a Christian would have, you can find so many millions of Hindus that practice in that. In some ways, a deeper way than a relationship with Jesus, right? Like, for example, there's very few Christian saints that have the bhakti like a Mirabai did, or like a Tukaram or Jnaneshwar, who are willing to throw away their entire lives, and just roam around singing songs and loving Krishna or Shiva or Shakti the way these people did in any tradition, right? Like, people talk about Rumi, he's very philosophical, but you don't see that true. I don't want to say true, but that depth of love for God, you can't find it anywhere, I don't think, but the tradition we follow. right? It's so deep. It is ingrained into our very being.
I mean,
People,
I feel like you can probably, that's such a subjective thing that you can
you're right,
probably follow. You can probably talk to someone who feels very, very strongly about their relationship with their God, and who's to say theirs isn't as strong as someone else. But
you're right. You're right.
But I think where a major difference occurs is that I feel like Hinduism is very interesting in a way that it's kind of like being in a supermarket. You're in a supermarket, you walk around, you like something, you pick it up off this shelf. You like something else, you pick it up off that shelf. Yeah. And you fill your cart up with something that really, really suits you. It's such a bespoke spiritual system that's what makes it so unique. However, whereas in like Islam and Christianity, there's only one way out.
Yeah.
There's only one way to find happiness, whatever, salvation, which is a silly word in my opinion, but still, like, there's only one way out. But here you're like, you're kind of like in a supermarket, you're kind of like trading, you're collecting Pokemon cards in a way.
Right.
Whereas Islam comes and tell you, burn all those Pokemon cards that you've had for like thousands of years in exchange for this one only. And every Hindu, that's why they look at it and they think that's silly. Why would I leave all my Pokemon cards behind for this one Pokemon card? You know what I mean?
Right. No, and that I think is totally right. Right. Like, it's people talk about cafeteria religion, right? In some sense, you pick and choose who you want, and I think that's a great analogy because in Hindu traditions or whatever, I'll use Hinduism for talking about all this stuff. In that world, you can do all that, but a lot of people get confused with all this stuff that's sitting in their cart, right? Yeah. What do I do with it? How do I pair the lemon with this and eat it? That's where a guru comes in, right? Yeah. A guru will take all these things that you put in your cart and say, okay, here's how you make a meal of it, and here's how you enjoy it, right? This is the main difference. Is he's not going to tell you you can only make it this way, and if you make it only this way, if you make it any other way, well, you're going to eat it. You're going to have like dysentery. No, he's not going to tell you that. He's going to tell you is, okay, you want to have this experience of food? Okay, here's how you do it, right? This is where exactly your point is when you come to many ways Islam and Christianity, and not Judaism so much, because the Jewish people and religion don't really care. They're just like, hey, we're doing our thing. Screw you guys. We're the chosen people.
I have a lot less problems with those guys.
Yeah. They're like, we're the chosen people. Screw you. We don't want you over to our side. Right. Anyways, but the Christians and the Muslims tend to be much more is, no, our way is the only way. Our perception is the only perception, because the God that they envision, their conception of God, is basically a bully in some sense, right? Like, is a bully in some senses. And I always say to them, like, so. And the difficulty that they tend to have is dealing with the problem of an all-knowing God creating a person that doesn't even want to know him, right? But they'll be like, well, that's because you don't know. And I'm like, oh, I know, but I just don't want to know that one. Yeah, that version of God you have. Like, I have no problem in the world, and I truly believe they're worshiping the same being that we all worship.
And it's also like, if let's say Christians or Muslims came to Hindus with the idea that, you know what, hey, we've got this guy, I think you'd really like him, check him out. And Hindus went, all right, we like your guy, Jesus, he seems like a nice guy, we'll add him to our collection.
That's exactly what happens.
That is how Hindus work. But they said, no, there's no collection anymore. Get rid of all of your collection and you can only follow this guy. That's where the problem starts. Right. If we could add Jesus to our pantheon, we'd be fine with it.
Yeah. I've gone to church. I've gone to mosques. I've prayed there. I mean, for me, it's like, I don't need to believe in all your central tenets to to worship the divinity that Jesus is, or the mosque presents, right? I don't need to buy into all your, to be honest, outlandish ideas about truth and heaven and hell and the nature of your conception of God. I think the biggest problem in both these religions are their conceptions of God, and that conception of God leads to every other problem that in their religion that is there. Right. Like God being judgmental. Yeah. I mean, this is the cool thing within, like, we can assign judgment nature to in the Hindu tradition to God, but we have a better mechanism. It's karma.
It is, and also, you can have a very different relationship with God. You can have God as a personal friend, and
Yeah.
you can
A lover.
say, you can say stuff to him or her, whatever, that you cannot say in other traditions. Like, for example, I don't know if you know about this, but Bihar is the land of Sita, right? Bihar is Sita's
Yeah.
home state.
Yeah.
So
She's Maithili
yeah. So
from Mithila.
when that whole thing happened, when Ram had the Agni Pariksha for Sita,
Yeah.
and Sita was very upset, and that still exists in the collective memory of like the Bihari people. So there are times where at weddings, they'll have weddings, and for weddings they have these like songs, these folk songs, and in some of the folk songs they actually straight up abuse Ram. They straight up abuse Ram because we're Sita's people. We were not
Yeah.
happy with how Sita was treated, so they straight up abuse Ram, and that is
Yeah.
a completely okay cultural practice in Bihar.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
So that's the relationship. Like if you have some disagreements with your God or your deity, you're very free to air them out.
Right. You go air them out because that's your personal relationship with
Yeah.
them, right? It's not a front. It's not blasphemy. And this is why I get angry sometimes when I see it in modern India when people like they'll say something bad about Ram or Krishna or whatever. Hindus take up arms.
Pitchforks are
Let
out.
them talk. I mean, do you think Rama or Krishna care? Like ultimately, like their purpose was for a particular thing. If we misinterpret it, that's our issue, not theirs, right?
Yeah.
So like like you brought up this thing like about the nature of relationships. Gita Govinda, right? Jayadeva's Ashtapadis that he wrote in the 12th century. The entire text is about Krishna. I mean, large part of the text is about Krishna having sex with gopis, describing it physically, and people will be like, "Oh my God, that's like so terrible." But it's in the context of the love between a Paramatma and Jivatma is so deep.
Right.
It's like lovers, right? So to have Krishna as a lover, which someone like Andal did, like Mirabai did, it's a relationship you couldn't have with, say, in Christianity as with Christ as your lover. You couldn't talk about, how deeply Christ loves you by holding your breasts, like they talk about in Gita Govinda.
Right.
Radha's breasts were held so deeply by Krishna. Where it talks about these things, but it's not meant to be pornographic.
Right.
It's not. It's meant to be very sensual, very deeply connected. Because what's one of our purusharthas? Dharma, artha, kama.
Yeah.
To have that experience of love, of lust, of desire is so important. And that doesn't change when you want moksha either.
That's another difference, right? It's not considered a sin to
No.
think these thoughts.
No. What is yoga, right? Chitti Vritti Nirodha, right? The stopping of the conscious mind, because we don't control our thoughts.
Yeah.
Our feelings we don't control. But the way you control it is to not control it, but to recognize these are things that hit your and this is why like the philosophical underpinnings are important. So what is actually feeling? The soul is not feeling, right? The soul is just an experiencing thing, but feelings are things that the soul sees as experiences, right? It's not what the soul doesn't change, doesn't have these experiences. Like for example, if you get deeper into it, it's like you have the koshas, the five koshas, Annamaya kosha, Pranamaya kosha, Ananda kosha, and there's these 5 koshas. So, but each of those coverings of the soul are what has a connection to the mind, and then connects to the mind through the buddhi and ahamkara, the entire system. It's really fascinating because it's actually the sense of these experiences and emotions we have are not evil because they come from our vasanas, from our genetic makeup, from our mental makeup. They just happen.
Right.
So we have to learn to just recognize them as basically a fly in the wind that's coming past our face, right?
Right. And then I feel like, okay, let me just acknowledge a couple of other super chats before we move on. Right is always right. Sufism was not part of Islam. Dancing music is haram. I mean, yeah, if you look at maybe the strictest interpretation of it, so Sufism doesn't really fit in as well. Then there's another one from Abhishek Kumar. He's saying, Sir, Modi ji ke aane ke baad se Bernal ke price बढ़ गए हैं. बढ़ने भी चाहिए. I really hope बढ़े. I hope it becomes the top selling item on Amazon in India. Jay Shah says we have Radha Krishna temples, one of its kind, unmarried couple being worshipped. I don't think there is any other religion which does this with their gods. That's a fair point. You know,
No,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
it's actually interesting because Radha Krishna is it's a very recent thing, right? It actually Radha was never in any of the ancient texts. Radha's role becomes very solidified in around the 12th century with actually Gita Govinda. It's the one that names the particular gopi that as Radha. Like there is a gopi in the Bhagavatam that Krishna is more into, but she's never named. But again, this is really interesting because after that you have this entire idea of Radha, and Radha, in the same way that Krishna represents masculinity, Radha represents femininity, right? It's this the interaction between the two. Now, whether Radha was real or not, I don't know, but it is one of the most beautiful like depictions of a connection that is over time, but disconnected, right? Like disconnected over time, but they're connected so deeply, right? Like especially in our traditional stories, like Krishna leaves Radha and she's pining for him ever, and he's always on her mind, and vice versa, right? It's a very beautiful divine connection between the soul and the Bhagavan.
Right. Yeah, I wonder what you think about this aspect as well, because there is a very strong focus on the sort of deep contemplative aspect of Hinduism as well. Yoga is one of the biggest proponents of sort of deep contemplation, contemplating the nature of reality, contemplating the nature of our existence, of our minds and stuff like that. And I wonder if you feel like, because I genuinely don't know the correct answer for this, but I wonder if you feel like Islam and Christianity allow for that kind of contemplation, because I feel like if they do, then you might reach certain conclusions that are very antithetical to the basic principles of Islam and Christianity. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, if you have more, go ahead.
No, yes, because that's what I was thinking, that, these kinds of contemplations can lead to certain conclusions that might be very personal to you, and that might not be that one size fits all approach that certain ideologies teach. So I wonder if you feel like that's another major point of difference, the celebration of that deep contemplation of the nature of our reality, of the nature of our existence, because you might not, if you're say like a pious Muslim doing that deep contemplation, you might not like what you find.
Right. So, I mean, historically, yes. So with Christianity and Islam, let me put a caveat this way. When Christianity started, it started off as being a very, very minor sect in Roman times, right? In Roman Empire. And then by I think 417 or something like that, it became the only religion in all the Roman Empire. And after that, everything that had to do with Rome and Greek thought, philosophy, was disappeared off the face of the Christian world, right? So from around that time till about, I guess, 1100 CE, Christianity had no contemplation about the nature of the world. When it came back in touch with the Roman thought, Greek thought, it started that entire process. Like, for example, you have Thomas Aquinas, who wrote Summa Theologica, trying to delve into the nature of reality and things of that nature. In a similar way, I would say, like, to what maybe the Acharyas did in our world, but in our sense, but it's similar. I'm not saying they're the same. We can use them as a point of reference. Right. And then you have people like Francis of Assisi, who was a mystic, or Meister Eckhart, who was a Catholic person that was kicked out of the Catholic religion for his deeply, like, almost Vedantic views, by the way. Like, because he was such a mystic, he was so connected to God. And by the way, as Hindus, we all have to accept that anyone, whether you're Hindu as a practice or whatever, a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, Native Americans, everyone can have the deep experience of Brahman without having any sort of Hindu-ness in their practice. So in that sense, Master Eckhart had it. I mean, there is a tradition, and even in the Islamic tradition, there's quite a few. Like, you have Averroes, Avicenna, all these guys that preceded the Christian world entrance into philosophy and thinking deeply about thoughts. These Muslim thinkers did, but they also, some of them were not allowed to express their views as openly, right? It's a different cultural milieu than what India had. So yes, in short, they had the same things that we could do, but the majority of the religions today are not that deep in thought like this, right?
Or they don't accommodate it.
Yes. Right? So I mean, Christians are really like, is Jesus plus nothing is really their, like a lot of things they say. It's as long as you accept Jesus, we don't care about your philosophical underpinnings, as if that doesn't matter, right?
Exactly, which is the fun part. That's so much fun to me, that once you accept Jesus, everything is forgiven. Everything is gone. You're good to go.
But we have that too, right?
Yeah, I know, we have that too. But I just find that such a silly idea, because I don't, during the elections and the whole thing that was going on with Trump when he was running and he was doing really well, and they asked the evangelicals, hey man, he's done like 90% of the shit this guy does is super non-Christian. But he's accepted Jesus, so it's all good.
Well, actually, I think with Trump, the thing is they go back to the Old Testament, to God using terrible kings to do his work, right? So a big problem in the difference in, I guess, not difference, but an issue would be like, they think there's some plan of God that's unfurling over time. And we have that too, by the way, because that's when the Avatar comes. Like when the Avatar comes, he comes for a purpose to reestablish Dharma or whatever it is, right? But in the Christian sense, God's really history is God's plan playing out. Right. Well, for us, history is cyclical, right? We like, time is cyclical. There's no one ultimate end. There's infinite times we're going to do this game. Infinite times we're playing it. Moksha is only important to us when we want to get out of this game. Right. Like if I'm enjoying my time with this game, I'm like, hey man, I'm gonna keep playing this game because it's fun. And that's perfectly fine, because there's no negative consequence to that, right? And that's why I think Hinduism thought is very world affirming, very world affirming. The here and now matters. The here and now matters not only because our karma, but because even moksha is here and now, right? It's by controlling, or not controlling, but getting deeper into ourselves and not letting the conscious, unconscious mind control us, that in the here and now that we have the sense of samadhi, right? Right. The here and now is fundamentally important. And this is why I said earlier, dharma is the central tenet. One has to engage in dharma, and it has to be done in the world. Like, if you want to not engage in dharma and do whatever and go be an ascetic. Right. Go to the forest, go meditate, go do that. That's your path. But the moment you decide to engage in our world, you have to behave in a dharmic way. And by that, I don't mean like morality of like, don't drink, don't eat meat, those are things that one should do, but it's not required for dharma. Right.
Yeah, it kind of brings me to one of the podcasts that you did. You did a podcast with the Brown Pundits, and I listened to it and I really enjoyed it. And it's kind of interesting. I feel like for them, because I think Razib works with this kind of stuff as well. So they were quite a bit focused on the sort of the Aryan invasion part of it. They had a part of your conversation focused on that, and a large part of the conversation around India and India's culture focuses on the Aryan invasion thing as well.
Oh, it totally does.
Right, which I find very interesting, and you raised that question, which I think was a great question. You raised that question during that conversation. That why is the Aryan invasion or the Aryan debate in general only focused around genetics? Why isn't there enough of a talk about the linguistics, linguistic history, archaeological history? Why isn't there enough of a talk about it? And I also think that in the West, a lot of talk about Indian culture is again tied around Aryan invasion theory, and the mainstream still talks about mostly the genetic argument that, oh, some people came from that time to India. But the funny thing about that is that the Aryans weren't the only group to go to India. There's been tons of groups over the ages that have traveled into India from time to time, but there isn't sufficient proof at all, and there's that they brought this culture or this entire civilization into India. In fact, there's proof that the language and the culture and the and the traditions of the people of India existed before the quote unquote movement came in, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've had Shrikant Talagiri on, and I think he did. I mean, he is, I would say, a bona fide expert in much of this, right? Like, I'm not a geneticist. I mean, I hate the fact that people call him just a bank teller. Are you telling me that just because you're a bank teller, your intelligence is any less, your ability to think is any less? I mean, there's a hubris in that position, right? Yeah. Which is to me is, especially like if someone like Witzel in the West be like, oh, he's just a bank teller. No, deal with his arguments, guys. I mean, like, who else who's a patent clerk? Freaking Einstein. Yeah. Einstein was a freaking patent clerk. Are you going to come back and tell me just because I'm not saying that Talagiri is the same thing as Einstein, but I'm just saying that logic applies. Yeah. Take people on for what they produce. So I think the truth here is genetics can only tell you movements of genes.
Right.
It's not going to tell you anything about movements of languages.
Yeah.
It's not going to tell you about anything of movements of cultures. Those are all things that language, until you get to a written record, there's no way for us to trace how languages went. And like, for example, like in the West, they found linear A and linear B in I think it was like Crete in Macedonia. I mean, in the Crete area in Minos. I think that's where it was.
Right.
And that's the first time they had context of Greek language being there, right? And then they had in our world, we still haven't deciphered, the Saraswati Sindhu language in these places and the Indus script. We don't know. I mean, a lot of this stuff we have to recognize is conjecture, narratives that we build. I think Shrikant Talagiri's reasoning is very, very strong, especially when it comes to look what our texts say internally, right? I mean,
why do you feel like people don't recognize that argument that much?
Because, and I think this goes back to a few points. And I think Vishwa Aduluri, Joydeep Bakshi, they bring up some of these issues, not particularly about Aryan invasion theory, but particularly about the scholarship of Mahabharata, for example, right? The idea that what has happened is you have these originally Christian or Christian-esque experience or explanations for why the Aryan invasion occurred, and over time that explanation becomes secularized. I mean, one of my biggest point is you're telling me when they came up with this date like 200 years ago, when they knew nothing about archaeology like we do now, nothing about genetics, and somehow the date hasn't changed. Are you literally telling me 1500 BCE, when some dude did not know anything about genetics, anything about said, oh yeah, it's around 1500 BCE, and today that number has not changed even by a freaking iota.
Yeah. That
you're telling me somehow that this is scientific? Sorry, can I cuss?
Yeah,
fuck
you
off.
can cuss. Yeah.
Yeah, fuck off. Because then you're showing me that even Darwin's theory, which has changed so much over time, dates have changed. Like we find all the time skulls somewhere else that pushes dates back by 10,000 years, 5,000 years, 100,000 years. But this date hasn't even changed by 1,000 years?
Right.
Come on, man. I mean, there's no sign. So the idea is, I think there's these things that were somehow originally religious mixed with secular, that became a standard base assumption, but what was a conclusion before became a premise now.
Right.
And that premise is, since they believe in it, if they stop that premise, their entire edifice falls apart. Right? Like, it's like any logical argument. Major premise, minor premise, conclusion. If your major or minor premise go away, your conclusion's gone. So all their conclusions that you have now, if their premises fall apart, go away. Right? So accepting something like Shrikant Talagiri's position, that the texts themselves only talk about these things, forces them to be like, oh no, then we have to go back and relook at all our scholarship?
Right.
And then if you have to do that, then what value does a current Indologist who's studying Aryan invasion, like Mike Woodsell, what does he bring to the table? He loses any prestige. There's a psychological element here. And another thing is, look, linguistic evidence has some value, right? But it's relative value. Like they can tell you that some things change over time, like language from, like Grimm's Law and things like that. Things change over time in a specified way. A word like "sha" becomes "sa," becomes this. They can tell you this stuff, right? And these aren't universal. They're relative laws. So we have to accept those things, but you don't have to accept their random dates and conclusions, which are pulled out of someone's ass, right? Because the dating of even the Rig Veda was majorly done by taking Buddha as a point and just kind of, in some ways, backtracking the language by saying 200 years for this, 200 years for... What's this 200-year number, right? Why was it 200 years for Upanishad's time? Why was it 200 years... and it's also misses the point. It doesn't do a truly holistic analysis, which I think Shrikant again does, is these are from different regions in different times, right? You don't see that in the scholarship of the Aryan invasion people.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It is interesting. It is interesting that there's hardly any focus on sort of the other aspects of the culture, other aspects of the debate. I found that part very interesting. I also found interesting that a lot of people, when I was, talking about asking you, or talking to you, a lot of people ask me that what are, like, American Hindus that live in the United States, what do they feel about what are their ideas on American politics? Like, what party or what side of the aisle do they find themselves associating more with? In my opinion, a lot of what I've seen, at least since for whatever short time that I've been here, is I've seen a lot of Indians voting Democrat. I don't know why exactly that is. Maybe because, Democrats the party of diversity, supposedly at least. So that's probably why. But what has been your experience? Because Hindus are in a very unique position in the West, aren't they? Because in a way, they're disliked by both sides of the aisle. Do you know what I mean? So they're in a very unique position in terms of like who to support, quote unquote.
I think it's very complex. So I am a registered Democrat, but I am not. I'm very liberal, but I'm not like a social justice guy, warrior. Right. I'm not. I have not taken it to that extreme. I try to be a little more nuanced in my thought process. So for example, like my parents, most people I know are like Democrat. I know quite a few Indians are Republicans, right? I feel like once you get to a certain threshold of money, it changes because like you want to maintain your wealth, right? Yeah. So like Indians, for a large part, and Hindus, I don't think for us issues like abortion matter as much. Yeah. Because I think we've had that has been part of our culture for whatever. Like for it's not a big issue.
Even something like, I feel like even something like evolution, that's not something Indians struggle with as much as people here.
No, I don't even, because for us it's like, okay, fine. We'll be like, it's like Dashavatar said, Matya Kurma, like that's evolution, right? Yeah. Like there's that argument, right? So we have the ability to do that. But I think what it comes down to in America, especially for Indians and Hindus, is I think the people outside, when they see us in the business context, they see us as Indians first. I don't think they care so much about Hindu or Muslim or whatever until they find out you're Muslim and they maybe are a little less happy with you. Because the thing about Indians tend to be is we're very, very, we're terrible within India, but we're very good outside of India, right? Like we follow every rule and law outside of India because we don't want to get in trouble. Like we're good that way. But politically, I think it's because we tend to we get the benefits of being closer to white people, but we're also seen as minorities, right? Right. So we are generally more liberal and especially in our social policies.
Right.
We support like affirmative action, but like for me, I support affirmative action, but I don't support it for Indians.
Okay.
I think we have way too many benefits anyway at this stage. Like but we get in on our merit right now most of the time anyway. Affirmative action works against us. I mean,
right.
Think about it. Most of the people that came to the U.S. from India were educated people.
Right.
If education is your standard of having a base of a step up, then we shouldn't get the benefit of just because we're brown skinned.
Right.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Like my brown skin is, and this is something else I also bring up is Indians are also our Hindus particularly are very quiet about their Hinduism, right, in the public sphere. Right, they're very quiet about it. Like they don't talk about it. Yeah. They don't engage with it. Like the only places they do is you go to Mandir, you go to a community event, you go home. That's the only places they talk about any sort of like Hindu religion or anything. So I think.
Why do you think that is? Do you feel like that's just a lack of confidence because there's not that sense of community overseas or a sense of unity overseas the way a Muslim community would have or like a Jewish community would have, for example? Do you think it's that?
No, I think it goes back to our maybe we as Indian people we're just like, hey man, we just do our thing, you do your thing. Why are we like engaged in talking about it when we don't have to, right? It's more of that, like, I mean, the reason that Christians and Muslims will talk to you about it or throw it on your face is to convert you. We don't care for that, right? We don't care to be like, and we're not also the people that are going to be like, and I think this is something we should bring up. We should, especially now, is I think you see a lot of these debates with Muslim versus Christian. Like you had, Farhan Quraishi, and you had a bunch of these people. All these people were at some point apologists that debated and engaged. We need to have more Hindus do that, right? We need to have a Hindu take a particular Sampradaic position. Say I'm going to be a Dvaitin, so I'm going to go argue with a Muslim person or atheist about my. Because that's the best way to get our ideas out there. Right? I think one of the best ways. But getting back to your point about politics, is we identify with minorities. We just do. Like, and I think it's because when our parents probably first came to this country, they probably dealt with some level of racism and issues of that nature. I mean, I have in my life too dealt with racism, but I'm a big guy. I'll just punch someone in the fucking face. I don't care. I mean, you're a big guy too. You're like 6'2", 6'3", so it's like, no, I'm like 5'11", 6 foot. So I don't really care. I played football. I do MMA. I'm cool. I have no, and I'm not saying I actually go around punching people in the face. A long time ago I did. Now I'm much more like calm about it, and I try to resolve situations. But it's a sense of showing some level of solidarity. And I think Indians do generally want to do better, make people better in America, right? Like, and that's why I think they tend to connect with the minorities and try to help them with their struggle too. But the flip side is we get too caught up in a lot of where that train is going, like the talks of equity. I don't understand it. I don't understand what you mean by equity. I don't really understand what people mean by social justice.
Equity is kind of an interesting one because I feel like it's almost moved over a little bit because equity used to be providing people an equality of opportunity, giving people the same opportunities as everyone else. But now it's sort of become equality of outcome. Everyone needs to have the same outcome, which that's not fair. People have different aptitudes and different abilities,
Yeah, and I think a part of this is I think a lot of Indians also believe in this concept. I mean, a lot of people believe in the concept of blank slate, that we're all at some point we just don't have the right education. We don't have the right this. Otherwise, we'd all be where we are. I don't believe that. I think we're all born with some inherent abilities.
And some people try harder than others. That there's that too. Some people work harder than others.
Yeah, and we also have to recognize that a lot of life is luck, right? And people work harder, but it's very important the narrative you tell yourself. Yeah. Like, whether you think you have control over your situation or not, because at the moment you don't think you have control, then you're not going to do anything more. You're just gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna blame this person. The reason my life sucks is this person's fault, that person's fault. Which is why I think karma is a very important thing, right? Because everything that happens to you is somehow related to your own fault. Right. It gives you the sense that, your life is in your own hands.
Right.
And it has to be. It fundamentally has to be. And even if that is true, even if free will is not real, right. Which also the funny part is, Hindu thought also tells you that too. Right. Free will isn't real. What happens to you is your own fault. The reason that you got to get out of all this is because of those things. Right. Moksha is important for that, right? But you should at least have the narrative that you're making changes in your life and you can take control of it. So, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to take a super chat really quick. Devang Patel, he's saying something that we discussed a little bit earlier. He's saying it's hard to explain to others. First of all, Devang, thanks very much for the super chat. He's saying it's hard to explain to others what is Hinduism. Everyone's looking for some kind of a manual like they have for Christianity and Islam. And Hindus don't even have a literal word for the word religion. They don't have an equivalent word for the word religion. Yep. So it becomes very difficult to sort of explain what Hinduism is to an audience. And I completely take that on board, but I also feel like, again, like we just discussed earlier, that I feel like we do need some sort of a concise idea.
But why? People, right? Here's my question, but why? I mean, then aren't we just playing into their conceptions of what a religion should be or what we should do, as opposed to, I mean, like, I think it's better for us to not play on their terms, play on our terms.
But do you feel like there's some value to maybe explain our concepts to them in their language or in their frame of understanding?
We can explain our concepts in their frame of understanding, but we should not take our entire conversation into their like framework, right? Like, engage with their frame of understanding, but don't put our things into their framework. Because you put it into their framework, you get a different result, and you get. And probably this might be controversial for some of your listeners. This is part of my problem with Hindutva. Okay. I might support a lot of what Modi is doing. I have a problem with Hindutva because I think it tends to do that. It tends to take this thing that is Hinduism and puts it into this Western framework of thought and makes it Hindutva.
What do you think when you think of the word Hindutva? What is your idea of it?
I mean, if I talk about like Savarkar's or those guys' position, I maybe agree with them more about it than what I think what it's become in what is, because for me, a Muslim is Hindu too, in the sense of like, if Hindu Christians are Hindus too. And like, for me, there's no difference unless you tell me that you have to practice a certain way or you have to live your life a certain way, and then otherwise we're going to like destroy you. Then I'm like, hey man, like,
I don't think Hindutva is that though. I don't think the Hindutva that is promulgated by people like Modi or the BJP is that kind of Hindutva necessarily. I think what the BJP and the Modi, their Hindutva they promulgate is more of an idea of providing a political space for Hindus is what Hindutva is. A sort of more political, a little more self-assertion on the side of the Hindus politically is what they consider Hindutva to be. I think there's a conflation where people think of Hindutva as a attempt to homogenize Indian society, which I've never ever seen anyone from the BJP ever say that we need a homogeneous Hindu society. I don't think they've ever said that. I'm sure there are some individuals in India that have that idea of creating some kind of pan-Indian, very strict Hindu identity. But I don't think anyone within the BJP or within the political mainstream has ever expressed that idea. I think the BJP's idea of Hindutva is more like, a more assertive Hindu, a politically assertive Hindu.
Yeah, and I don't find necessarily the problem with that. So I guess then I can say, I mean, my difficulty is I have read, like, let me put it this way, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time looking through Hindutva, but most of the books are written by super left-leaning scholars who have a certain position on it. My position on that has softened and changed considerably over time, just because of the more interactions I've had and lived in India couple years. I didn't necessarily see that sort of hatred spewed, and then when I looked into issues like even Ram Janmabhoomi, what changed a lot was that I think the evidence is stronger and stronger that there was a temple there, and a mosque was built on top of it legitimately, right? Instead of like where you have a lot of leftist historians coming out saying, "Oh, there was nothing there," or if there was, it was like this chota, tiny little thing. You're like, "No, dude, I think there was like this is the birth." Go to any place in India that has Krishna was born or Sita was born, you'll find a temple that's pretty legit size.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
and a place that's very, very meaningful
revered.
to Hindus.
Yeah. So like this isn't that Babri Masjid isn't even meaningful to most Muslims. They don't freaking care about it.
Yeah, they don't. No, Hindus go and pray there outside the campus. Outside the complex.
But my bigger question is like, dude, was there a pier here? Was there? No, there wasn't. It was just a freaking random mosque.
It was done specifically to spite Hindus.
Yeah, my point is, if this was a dargah for like a pier or something, hey man, we could talk about sharing space, whatever. But you already have Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem. I mean, if you're a Muslim, that's where your holy land is. Right. Why are you talking to Hindus about a deity that they so revere that people say all the time, Jai Shri Ram, and it's like you say Allahu Akbar. We say the same thing, but use this deity's name, and you're not going to give us a little bit, be like, hey man, just take it. Like I would, like if let's say if it's my apartment, like and some guy came to my apartment and said, hey man, the previous tenant that lived here, he was like my guru. Can I put up a little thing here? And I'll be like, yeah, man, go for it. I'm not gonna be like, dude, no, this entire place is mine. No, but if there's no other connection to that, but there was a masjid here. No. I mean, you have to be a little more. If you're asking to, I think that issue has been so politicized that a true dialogue between the communities could have resolved this, but it's become partly because the media started saying this is Hindus attacking this.
I mean, that's exactly what it was actually. There was a ASI archaeologist, the Archaeological Survey of India.
Yeah,
an archaeologist from there, KK Muhammad, who excavated at the site and who said that, look, man, there's ample proof here of a grand temple being here before the mosque was built. And he suggested to the Muslim community that this would be such a incredible gesture of goodwill if you said, you know what, build your temple here. We will build a temple. We will build our mosque next to your temple, and that will go such a long way in healing these massive wounds that exist among different communities. But these leftist historians, they came out and they said, no, we are not going to give an inch. And what has that done? What has that resulted in, except for 20, 30 more years of acrimony and anger between the two communities? That's the only thing that's resulted from it.
I know, and this is what I'm saying. It's just like these things that could have been solved, and partially, and like I think my early years I was pretty leftist, like much more leftist than I am now. I'm not saying like I think I just started looking deeper into leftist positions, and found them to be wanting, right? Like for example, like. And this all stems from this idea of a dialectical materialism, that everything is two opposing things that are playing off each other. Oppressor, oppressed, all this other victim, victimizer, all that crap. Yeah, that's there. But it's there amongst a myriad of different relationships, right? Like I might be oppressed in one situation, but an oppressor in another situation. I might also be someone giving in this situation. I mean, that same individual or entity can be multiple things. If you only look at it from one way, you're only going to have perspective. But if you look at beings as being multi-layered, complex, then that analysis changes considerably. So when I started looking at things from a more multivariate perspective, then the leftist in position in their view shifted. I did not agree with it.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. You're going to notice that same thing with the whole Kashmir thing right now. I don't know how much you have to deal with that in your interactions with everyday Americans, but I get that question all the time, and the most common view that I see here in America is that this is some sort of a Hindu takeover
Yeah.
Kashmir. You know, it's a attempt by the BJP government to create a Hindu state in Kashmir. That's what they're trying to do, and the evil Hindu population is supporting it. That's the most common narrative that I see here in India, and there's not nearly enough pushback on it as well. But if you know anything about Kashmir, if you know anything about Article 370 and what Article 370 did to the state of Kashmir and to the various people of Kashmir, you would not be making that argument. But that's not stopping people, and that's the crazy part.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just read an article that came in the Guardian by what's this guy? Anish Kapoor. And it was such a, to be honest, a terrible article. Yeah. It was his opinion piece about how India or the BJP is basically turning India into the Hindu Taliban, right? You know, and
come on, man.
I'm like, yeah, it totally is, right? Because it's been killing off Muslims left, right, and center as a governmental entity. It's been like, you know, like
right. They're
attacking
executing
Christians,
people in the streets. They're putting women in.
They're taking away rights. Muslims are no longer worshiping in masjids and mosques in India. I mean, come on. I mean, just or people that say stupid shit like they're killing democracy. Do you even know what the fuck you're talking about? First of all, India's not a damn democracy. It's a fucking republic.
Yeah.
You know, like the mass doesn't govern everything. Like the mass.
And how much more democracy do you want? This guy was elected. He went and fought elections just like in any other democratic country.
Well, he wasn't elected. His party was, but they voted primarily for him.
Yeah.
Right. And this what I'm saying is, like, learn to use the terms. You can say maybe it violates democratic principles. I don't know how it does. You can make if you want to make the argument, please fucking make the argument. Yeah. You know, like I'm willing to debate anyone about this stuff because I think it's just stupid. I'm like, stop using first demagoguery. Stop using like highly incisive language that you want to get your clickbaiting language. Like I'm cussing now, but like I'm not really like my personality is when I debate, I'm aggressive. I do what I need to do. But on the right, I'm not that way. I'm very so most of the stuff is writing, right? So we talk about people's writing, like even Arundhati Roy, who makes this idiotic claim.
She's a loon. She's a complete loon.
Idiotic claim, right? You know, and like, oh, there's no moral difference between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Are you kidding me? Are you? I mean, this is the level of idiocy that requires for you to make an absurd statement that way.
Yeah.
Like, there's a country that legitimately is killing Balochis like they're nothing. That has incited a civil war where 3 million Bangladeshis were killed. 3 freaking million, right? Just because they were not the same as themselves. It was an ethnic cleansing. Like, and you're equating that to Kashmir, in which India is not saying, hey, we want you guys destroyed and out. You're saying, hey, we want our laws to apply to you.
Right.
We don't need the Valmiki community being oppressed. We don't need women. What other part of the world? I mean, and she claims to be a feminist. And people claim to be feminists. Women in Kashmir, you marry a non-Kashmiri man, cannot own land or their children can't. That's disgusting. That is half the population of people that are being treated less than a man is. And you're telling me now that government is okay? That government is following democratic principles. That government is doing humanity. Shut the fuck up.
Like every single feminist is completely quiet on this issue. Like nothing.
If you're going to be moral, be principled, be moral and be principled. Yeah. Talk about that issue. Yes, I will 100% say India over the years, militaristically, has been pretty stupid when it came to Kashmir. Has treated people horribly, has done that crap. I'm not going to say that did not happen. But that does not make it right for what Kashmiris themselves were doing to their own people. Yeah. Right? And, you know, one could say India, I think, would not have had that response to Kashmir, militarizing them, you know, the killings, whatever that happened, extraditions at night, whatever, I don't know, all this stuff. If not for one, the terrorist element. If the terrorist element was not there, none of that would happen. Because even like when Kashmir first came into Indian territories, were they militarized? No, they're left to their own accord. They were perfectly fine until like the past like 20 some years. Why? Because you had a fucking terrorist come in funded by Pakistan. And you had this entire movement for the past generation that these Kashmiris have had their brains like basically inundated with Pakistani ISI nonsense
Yeah.
that they have become so anti-India when they don't seem to understand. You guys bring no economy to India. The food that goes in your mouth is because Indians give a shit about you.
Yeah.
Like the people in the rest of the country are taking money out of their pockets that goes to the center to give you money to have some semblance of a society. But you don't want to treat your own people right?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
No, India did the right thing here, ultimately to integrate them. What are they going to lose at worst? What are they going to lose?
I mean, I don't know if they've lost anything really.
Yeah, that's what I'm
if
going to say.
anything, they've gained because, half of Kashmir's population have gained their rights back is essentially what's happened.
You would lose your culture?
Yeah.
I mean, your culture has always been integrated with India, like the massive India. What are you losing? The past 70 years of culture?
Right.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're losing your highly violent the past 20 years of Islamicist. I mean, not Islamic like Islam on the whole, but is fundamentalist mentalities towards religion.
Right.
You're losing the two terrible families that ran your entire country. I mean, your region for years.
Right.
And let's not forget about Ladakh and Leh. They both wanted out of that situation anyway. So that's a lot of people there that are super happy. But just one tiny little valley. Yeah. They control all of it. Yeah. I mean, 70% of the entire government was only from that fucking valley.
Yeah. That's the situation, and that's the kind of, I feel like, misinformation that we're dealing with now, and there needs to be some sort of pushback, and that's why I'm happy that someone like you is there. You're not necessarily talking about Indian politics that much, but even from the from in terms of Indian philosophy and what the Indian culture is all about, what Indian beliefs are, what Indian philosophy says, because there's a ton of misinformation about that too. It's not just the political part. There's a ton of misinformation about the politics part. So, I'm happy that you're out there doing that. We better leave it at that today. I gotta get out of here soon. But
sure.
But again, I appreciate you coming on today, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, man. I mean, we'll have you on ours too, so we can find out your background and
just say when.
Yeah, we'll do it. If your viewers have any questions, they can reach out to me. It'd be great, to do some cross pollination with our guys.
Yeah, for sure. Guys, you can go follow Meru Media. It's meru.media, right? I think.
Yeah, meru.media is our website. We also have the podcast on Stitcher, YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, all that stuff. So you guys look up Meru Media. Like Sham and I, we actually met in Chicago, I guess like 2-3 weeks ago. Yeah. It was a really cool time. One of the things I think it would be great to do is in the future, maybe try to get, like, if people are in the region, maybe do like get-togethers with, like listeners that are interested. So we could the idea is to really build a community. I think it would be great to like, I think we talked about this before, like having a community of us, people are interested in our culture, our traditions, history, and even the brown pundits, right? Like they're very much in the same vein. When we're in a city together to do like an event where we can have people that might listen, come and hang out. We can do like just a way to build our solidarity, to show that we're making a difference and we're trying to bring some more value to people's lives with these podcasts, with these engagements. I think it'll be great.
Right, absolutely. I want to just acknowledge the last couple of super chats. Abhishek Kumar, thank you very much. And Right is Always Right, thanks again as well, man. Guys, again, you can check out Mukund and Meru Media at meru.media. I'll provide his social media down there as well. Again, thanks, Mukund, for coming on today. I appreciate it. The podcast will be available in the evening. Other than that, guys, if you liked today's episode, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a like, leave a comment. Tell us what you thought about today's episode. I will see you guys for the next episode. And until then, stay happy, stay healthy. I'll see you guys soon.
All right. See you guys. Thanks, man.